The Southern Command Network, SCN. It's the oldest in AFRTS. For 58 years, SCN provided news and entertainment to Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, plus their families, and DoD civilians and their families. It brought a taste of home to the men and women stationed in Panama, and it introduced the local community to American culture. This station and the people who worked here, past and present, military and civilian, have seen history and made history. And shortly, SCN becomes part of AFRTS history. SCN is going off the air. But before we leave, we're going to take a look at how and when SCN was founded. We'll talk with former members of our network, discover that SCN's influence extended beyond the fence lines of the bases, posts, and installations that once dotted Panama, and look at the events that defined this station and its people. Welcome to our final broadcast. In a roundabout way, SCN exists because of President Theodore Roosevelt. During the Spanish-American War, he'd wanted additional naval support, but the American fleet was in the Pacific, and getting to the Caribbean meant going around the tip of South America, a voyage of 8 weeks and 8,000 miles. Roosevelt wanted a shortcut, and what the man wanted, he usually got. But Roosevelt wasn't the first man who dreamed of a Panama Canal in Panama. Balboa, the discoverer of the Pacific Ocean, envisioned a waterway connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific. In 1534, the necessary technology didn't exist, but the idea of a Panama Canal wouldn't go away. The French, in 1882, made the first serious attempt to build a canal. Ferdinand de Lesseps, a French engineer who'd overseen the successful digging of the Suez Canal, commanded the building of the Panama Canal. He was extremely confident of success. That confidence didn't last. The French made serious mistakes, dooming the project from the start. The engineers decided on a sea-level canal, ignored Panama's swampy terrain, underestimated the difficulty of cutting through the mountainous Continental Divide, and overestimated their technology. The men and machines quickly fell to almost 8 months of rain, heat, and humidity, but most of all, yellow fever and malaria. Eventually, the loss of men, 20,000 in 9 years, plus money and support, forced the company to give up. They sold the rights and equipment to the U.S. But America wouldn't launch into building a canal right away. It would take a war and the lessons learned in that war and the determination of a president to build the canal. The year was 1898. The war was the Spanish-American War, and then Assistant Secretary of the Navy Teddy Roosevelt wanted the support of Navy warships. When Roosevelt was elected president, he focused on getting his two-ocean Navy. The U.S. negotiated with Colombia to build a canal through Panama, which in 1903 belonged to Colombia. However, Colombia's Senate rejected the agreement. A group of Panamanians, fearing America would build the canal in Nicaragua and covertly aided by the U.S., overthrew the Colombian government in Panama and declared their country's independence. The U.S. parked a few warships off the coast, ensuring Panamanian independence. 2 weeks later, Panama signed a treaty with the U.S. The original agreement gave America perpetual lease to a strip of land 10 miles wide, the right to take over more Panamanian land if needed, and the right to use troops to intervene in Panama. The U.S. agreed to guarantee Panama's independence and paid $10 million, a treaty no Panamanian citizen negotiated or signed. Canal construction started in 1904. John Stevens, the chief engineer, decided the Panama Canal should use a system of locks, discarding the idea of a sea-level canal. The engineers employed other lessons learned from their predecessor, especially in the control of malaria and yellow fever. Army Medical Officer William Gorga suspended work on the canal, directing the men to drain swamps, clean and fumigate their camps and buildings, dig drainage ditches, and spray the mosquitoes' breeding grounds with oil, killing the mosquito larvae. In 18 months, yellow fever and malaria, possibly the greatest threat to the canal's completion, was virtually eradicated from the canal zone. But victory wasn't cheap. Every dead mosquito cost the U.S. $10. But with disease under control, construction proceeded. For the next 10 years, 150,000 men, most from the Caribbean, labored on the canal. Its final price tag, $350 million. But the workers finished it earlier than expected, and on August 15, 1914, the first ship transited the Panama Canal, just in time for World War I. In 1919, the first U.S. Navy ships passed through, fulfilling Teddy Roosevelt's desire of a two-ocean navy. But he never saw that day. He died several months earlier, and the war postponed the canal's true opening until 1920. But the dream of 3.5 centuries of a waterway connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific was finally made real. But with the Panama Canal's completion came new problems. It was as vulnerable to attack as it was strategically important. It needed protection, and that meant an American military presence. A presence that's continued through a global depression, a Second World War, and the Korean and Vietnam Wars. And it's fitting in a way that as this century winds down, that the military presence draws down in Panama. But where in this does SCN fit in? We'll tell you right after the break.